Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Be Bold America. I'm Mike Clancy, Be Bold America's co-host. For Project Censored's 50th anniversary, our program today is the Global Crackdown on Free Expression, and we will be talking with Dr. Steve Macek about his work to combat growing attacks on freedom of expression and academic freedom here in the U.S. and around the world. Over the past decade, free speech and academic freedom have faced a synchronized global decline. This erosion is not limited to traditional autocracies. It has increasingly taken root with established liberal democracies, most notably right here in the United States. The threats manifest in two primary ways: external political and legal coercion from governments and lawmakers, and internal cultural pressures leading to self-censorship and polarization. Globally, the restriction of free expression typically mirrors a country's broader shift toward authoritarian governance. We have big things to do. Our interview guest today is Dr. Steve Macek. Dr. Macek is a professor of communication and chair of the Department of Communication and Media Studies at North Central College in Illinois. He teaches courses on the First Amendment, journalism history, media policy, media criticism, and urban studies. He serves on the editorial board of the journal Communication and Democracy and on the steering committee of the Union for Democratic Communication. Dr. Macek is the author of Urban Nightmares: The Media, the Right, and the Moral Panic Over the City, a critical analysis of media discourse about American cities. His op-eds, commentaries, and articles on censorship, academic freedom, media regulation, and politics have been published in a wide range of newspapers, magazines, and websites. Dr. Macek is also a frequent contributor to Project Censored and co-coordinator of Project Censored's Campus Affiliates program. Hello, Steve. Welcome to Be Bold America.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Great. Steve, first of all, thank you for all you do to educate people on the threats to free expression and academic freedom we are seeing all around the world, and especially right here at home. It seems to me that without protections to speech and academic freedom, it's hard to see how democracy can be preserved. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, in fact, I would go so far as to say that the idea that free speech and academic freedom, free public, uncoerced, unconstrained public discourse is, like, in my view, the foundation of democracy, and that premise is sort of the premise of all the research and writing that I do pretty much these days. I think, historically, if you look back, back to the 18th century, to the era of, the first democratic revolutions, the press and publication generally played like a huge role in fomenting popular demands for liberty and for democracy. Think about the pamphleteers like Tom Paine in the British colonies in North America, right? And the role that Tom Paine's writings played in fomenting the demand for independence. Think about the role of usually censored and underground publications in France during that led to the French Revolution. Every one of those democratic revolutions, the revolution we're celebrating the 250th anniversary of
Yes.
this year in North America, the revolution in France a few years later, all of them had as one of their core demands freedom of expression and freedom of the press, right?
Yes.
It's not an accident that the very First Amendment to our Constitution was the First Amendment.
Yes, definitely.
Which declares Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech or of the press, and similar sorts of demands were made in the democratic revolutions that occurred in Europe after that. So I think people have long recognized you cannot have democracy without a cultural space where citizens can exchange views, engage in political debates, gather information about what their governments and other powerful interests are doing, and form public opinion, right?
Yes.
Without that free cultural space, which usually is, sometimes it takes place in, sometimes that space is formed in actual physical spaces like town halls and coffee shops. But more often than not, the place where citizens meet and hash out, their common interests and debate policies and proposals is in, the pages of newspapers or, today, online, in various online forums, or on shows like this one, right?
Yes,
Without that, you can't have a democracy.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Fundamental.
Uninformed citizenry, a democracy without a means of popular information is a tragedy or a farce.
Yeah. Well, along those lines, tell me about Project Censored and your involvement in it.
Sure. So Project Censored is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. It is a long-running media monitoring and critical media literacy organization that started in 1976 as a college seminar on censorship at Sonoma State University. It was started by a former newspaper journalist and advertising guy who got a degree in sociology, Carl Jensen, and he noticed that there were really important stories, impactful stories that were being reported in smaller local publications, niche publications, what we might call the alternative press, that were not getting discussed in the big national commercial for-profit media. And he had his students do this exercise where they went through literal physical copies of progressive, alternative magazines, trade publications, local newspapers to identify stories that they thought embodied news values and were deserving of more public attention that were just being passed over and not discussed. And then he, every year, came up with a collection of these stories that his students found and submitted them to a panel of judges to review, former journalists, educators of various kinds, and so on. And then the judges discussed the stories, selected the ones they thought were most important, and ranked them. And he sent out a press release every year trying to get more attention for these underreported important stories.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward 50 years later, we publish a book every year, Project Censored does, which is now called State of the Free Press, that contains summaries of these stories that students, no longer just at one university, at a dozen universities around the country, hundreds of students have submitted to the project after researching them that they think are worthy and deserving stories that are impactful, that are important for the public to know, but that have been overlooked or ignored by the big corporate media.
Yeah.
How the project I think it's important to say here that when we usually think of censorship, and I teach courses on media law and the First Amendment, the way the courts define censorship is as prior restraint, as instances where the government or the state is trying to prevent the release of certain information, the publication of a certain news story, or the release of certain documents, like say the Pentagon Papers.
Yes.
The Project Censored defines censorship in a slightly different way. We define censorship as when any institution, whether it's a private media corporation, a business, or the government, is withholding information that the public deserves to know and that would be important in the civic life,
yes,
right, of the country. So it's a slightly different definition. It doesn't require that government be the agent of the suppression of the information, and in many cases it is self-censorship by corporate media, or simply the corporate media deliberetely not covering certain sorts of stories while focusing on others.
Yeah, well, speaking of corporate media, it seems to me that having control of major media outlets concentrated in the hands of a very few people is unhealthy for democracy. with names like Rupert Murdoch and Elon Musk coming to mind. What's your view on that?
Oh my gosh. Well, this is one of the major issues that Project Censored has been writing about and talking about for the past 50 years, because concentration of media ownership inevitably leads to a narrowing of the range of information available to the public,
yes,
and to marginalizing of specific perspectives that might contradict the economic interests of big corporate conglomerate media owners.
Yeah, you can really see that on with X, and you can see that with Fox News for sure.
You can see it with X and Fox News, but frankly, you can see it with every single one of the big corporate media.
Okay.
All of the the major television news networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, I would argue, tend to minimize and overlook news that might be harmful to their parent company's interests.
I see.
Or might hurt the interests of their advertisers. A classic example of this is, that Project Censored has been documenting for 50 years, is that, one of the most frequent types of stories that we think get overlooked by the corporate news media are environmental stories.
Okay.
Stories about the fact, for example, that Shell and Exxon and all of the other huge fossil fuel companies knew for decades that their products contributed to global warming.
Yes, for sure.
That the burning of fossil fuels, released carbon that was raising the temperature of the globe.
Yep.
And there's a lot of evidence that the corporate media simply did not pursue this story. And why didn't they pursue it? Well, if you look at the advertising spots that are run right, on corporate news,
right?
Every other one is an ad, either run by an oil company or a power company, or by, say, an automobile manufacturer that has very close relationships with oil companies, and so they're that is also, the automobile industry has also done its part to contribute to the problem of global climate change. So it is not surprising that for years the corporate media was behind the curve on reporting on this. Now, I would say that one of the things we found, in recent years, they are doing a somewhat better job of reporting on this, just because the scientific evidence for the contribution of fossil fuels to global climate change is now incontrovertible. It's difficult to deny, but they're still not covering it very well. And there was a recent report that was discussed by Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting that found that over the past 3 years, reporting on global climate change in the corporate media has actually declined, even as the global temperature, and the catastrophic weather caused by global climate change has been on the rise.
Yeah, I've seen that for sure. There's a great quote I love. It's from Al Gore, and that is, quote, "Every night on the evening news is like a nature ride through the book of Revelation," unquote. And you kind of see that every night. There's night after night after night. There's all these extreme weather events happening, and
right.
all that
and they're not
kind of stuff.
Connecting the dots.
And in many
right?
cases, they're not connecting the dots. You're right.
Yeah, they're not saying, "Hey, this is because of these automobile companies that are advertising on our shows," because obviously that would hurt advertisers.
Yes, I agree.
So the danger of the concentration of media ownership is also that, many of these media companies also have other interests. I mean, if you just think about Paramount Skydance, which is run by David Ellison, who's the son of Larry Ellison, who's it's financially backed by his father, who is the owner of Oracle,
right.
and is a huge ally of Donald Trump. Paramount Skydance is in the process of acquiring Warner Brothers Media. Now, they already own CBS, which is one of the major television news operations in the country. And once this merger goes through, this acquisition goes through, they will also have control over CNN.
Oh boy!
And the leadership of Paramount Skydance, the CEO is a close friend of Donald Trump.
Well,
we will no longer expect, and we actually saw what happened.
That's a real concern. Hold that
we
thought.
Saw what happened when he took over CBS. It's completely changed the tenor of their news operation. Completely gutted what was really the showcase investigative news show on American television for decades.
60 Minutes.
60 Minutes has
Okay.
now been gut.
I know. Let's hold that thought. Let's come back to that. I want to take a quick break here, but I do want to explore that further with you. You are listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7, 89.5, and 89.7 FM. Many voices, one station. Live stream globally from the ksqd.org website. For Project Censored's 50th anniversary, our topic today is the Global Crackdown on Free Expression. And we are speaking with Dr. Steve Macek, Professor of Communication at North Central College and a prolific author on topics pertaining to free speech, censorship, and academic freedom. I'm your host, Mike Clancy.
Hey, Tom Hartman here. You know how I always say democracy is not a spectator sport? Well, Jill Cody knows the rules of the game, and she delivers it to you straight on Be Bold America, Friday at 5 p.m. right here on KSQD. Jill brings in the best political thinkers of our time who will show you what to keep doing, stop doing, and start doing to support democracy in our world. That's Be Bold America, Friday at 5 p.m. right after the Tom Hartman program, right here on K-Squid, 89.5, 89.7, and 90.7 FM and ksqd.org. Tag, you're it.
Exploring the intersections of rhythmic music from New Orleans, Kingston, Jamaica, and Havana, Cuba. The Downbeat Shuffle program, Fridays at 6 p.m. on KSQD.
Today our topic is the global crackdown on free expression, and we are speaking with Dr. Steve Macek, Professor of Communication, author, and free speech advocate. So, Steve, we were talking about 60 Minutes. I mean, that's been a complete disaster. You want to reiterate what happened there?
Well, I mean, 60 Minutes, as a show that's, I think it's been on the air for at least 5 or 6 decades.
Yeah.
And was really one of the few places on network television anywhere that did real hard-hitting investigative news. But when Barry Weiss took over, who is not a journalist, let's be very clear, she was a very conservative, contrarian opinions columnist for the New York Times, who then went off and started her own, publication. When she was put in charge of the news operation, she began very systematically cracking down on what could be said on 60 Minutes, especially the kinds of stories that they stories that they could pursue and the criticisms that they could make of the current administration. It has now become, I don't want to say it's utterly useless, but it's certainly been, the show has certainly been defanged, and it's a shadow of its former self. And many of the former staffers, former reporters for 60 Minutes have spoken out about this.
Yes, they have. You kind of have to worry, is that going to be a template for what's going to happen to other networks and other shows?
I certainly think, given who she reports to, given who her boss is, that if this merger between Paramount Skydance and Warner Brothers Discovery goes through, this could be the template for what happens to CNN.
Yeah, that's a real concern.
And that would actually be, I think, an even bigger tragedy, because, 60 Minutes had a number of, several dozen reporters, I think, several dozen reporters on staff. But CNN is the major television outside of the BBC, globally, is like the major source of television news around the globe.
Yeah.
CNN International is watched in over, I think, 100 countries by millions of people every day. I mean, I don't think it has the same respect internationally as BBC does, but nevertheless, they do an incredible amount of reporting. They put they invest a lot in reporters and resources to cover, especially breaking news.
Yeah.
Well, if that news outlet falls under the control of these MAGA conservatives, you just shudder to think what sorts of stories we won't hear, what sorts of information will be withheld, because it wouldn't be particularly flattering to the current administration in Washington.
Indeed. And as you know, Trump often tries to degrade and discredit news organizations that report stories that are critical of him by labeling them fake news and the enemy of the people. Isn't this a form of censorship? And how should these news organizations deal with this behavior?
I mean, I don't think that his, insults and attack, verbal assaults on the media are censorship in themselves.
Okay.
They can certainly pave the way for censorship, and that's what is sort of concerning to me. It's clear he doesn't have much respect for the press. He has no respect for the First Amendment and freedom of the press. And his sort of verbal assaults on reporters and news organizations, he's always referring to the New York Times as the failing New York Times, are sort of a piece with that. But at one level, if you're a First Amendment absolutist, you have to just say, well, that's his First Amendment right. That's more speech, right? And so, in fact, I would prefer that the way he respond to coverage he doesn't like is by denouncing it, rather than what he's actually done, which is ordering his chair of the FCC, Brendan Carr, to demand that television stations affiliated with networks he thinks are unfair to him undergo review of their licenses. I mean, right now, I'm sure your listeners may have heard about this, but because he believes that ABC and Disney, which is owned by Disney, is biased against him. Donald Trump believes this. Yeah. He has instructed Brendan Carr to demand that every ABC TV license in the country go up for early review. Now, the way that broadcast TV licenses work is this. Usually, your license is up for review every 8 years. And every 8 years, the license has to the licensee, the individual TV stations have to reapply for the license. They have to, submit some documents proving that they've made a good faith effort to serve the public interest, convenience, and necessity, that they haven't allowed, people to swear, in prime time, and so on and so forth, that they've abided by FCC regulations. Well, every ABC affiliate around the country is now being asked to reapply early, to go through the renewal process early, this is punitive, and this is a punitive use, and I would say a censorious use of the government's regulatory power over the airwaves to punish the political enemies that perceived. I don't even think that ABC is a political enemy of Donald Trump. I really don't see it.
I don't see it either.
To punish, what he doesn't like is that Jimmy Kimmel is on ABC affiliates, right? So, it's absolutely appalling. It should be illegal. I know it's being challenged legally. There are lots of legal challenges to it, but it's still, nevertheless, the stations are having to go through this extra work to reapply, and there's no guarantee that they will get their licenses back.
Yeah, well, that's a lot. That's a lot of pressure.
They're affiliated with a network that he despises.
Right.
Usually, I believe it rotates by state. So in every given state, all of the licenses are up for for renewal at the same time for all broadcast outlets, radio and television, and then it moves on to the next state. And this is really irregular. This is stunningly irregular.
Definitely. Well, I want to turn. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I was going to say, I mean, the other things that he's doing that are, I think, really dangerous is not his denunciations of media organizations, the fact that he has brought, as a sitting president, countless libel suits against, in newspapers for running polls that he didn't like, television news networks, and in many cases, and social media platforms, and in many cases, those media, the social media platforms, et cetera, have settled those lawsuits and paid him money. Basically, it's extortion. It's
yes, definitely.
kind of a gangster-like extortion racket, because no First Amendment lawyer, and I know some First Amendment lawyers, no First Amendment lawyer would tell you that those suits had any prayer of success.
Yeah.
But because they're being brought by the most powerful man in the country, in the world, people decided to bow down, kiss the ring, and pay him this money, which he is funneling into his library / presidential center.
And of course, he has his own personal attorney as the Attorney General, which is kind of an issue. I'd like to turn our attention now a bit to social media. Many young people get most or all of their news from social media rather than traditional media. Do you have concerns about that?
Absolutely, because social media is just a distribution platform. Facebook, Google, TikTok, none of them employ reporters. So most of the actual news that you see on social media has been shared there from some, legitimate professional news organization, and the reporters and the news organizations who put the resources into covering those stories are not usually getting anything in return. They're not getting a cut of the advertising revenue from the TikTok channel or Facebook or YouTube, right? So there's that problem, and then I know you're aware that misinformation and actual fabricated news flourishes online, and there's lots of research that suggests that even very educated people have a very difficult time distinguishing real news from fake news online.
Yeah, and that brings up something I wanted to get your opinion on. As a professor of communications, what's your take on the proliferation of AI tools that make it easy for bad actors to create and distribute false information and fake news, including realistic audio and video content? Is this a growing threat to our democracy?
It's terrifying to me. It's dangerous for our democracy. I would agree. I think there should very least be some sort of labeling law that requires a very prominent label on any AI, manipulated content or AI fabricated content that sounds like or resembles something that a real person, might have said, an AI video of, let's say, Joe Biden saying he loved, Joe Biden saying he hates America, let's say, that there should be a requirement that be labeled as an AI generated fabrication. And in fact, a number of states, when it became clear that AI could really easily simulate somebody's voice, and this was during the last election, during the 2024 election, and voters were being inundated with these robocalls that sounded like Joe Biden and sounded like politicians whose voices they recognized, but were actually AI generated. A number of states started passing laws requiring disclosure. Now, here's the thing. Because of the way that the Supreme Court has interpreted the First Amendment, it is not illegal to lie, especially on the campaign trail. You have a legal right to lie. Your listeners should look up the Alvarez case, where somebody who was running for a small local office lied about having received a Congressional Medal of Honor. and was prosecuted under like a stolen valor law that said you can't lie about winning military honors, and the Supreme Court struck down that law as a violation of the First Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
So according to the Supreme Court, you can lie, especially on the campaign trail, because above all, as it's been interpreted by the Supreme Court, what the First Amendment especially protects is political speech.
Well, it certainly worked for Donald Trump.
It did, right? So Donald Trump has a First Amendment right to lie and lie flagrantly. He can say that he had the best economy. He oversaw the best economy the world had ever seen. He can make stuff up, and he is protected by the First Amendment. I'm not sure I would want the government kind of refereeing the truth or falsity of claims that are made in political debates, because that could get very dangerous if you had the wrong people in office.
Hold that thought for a second.
Trump.
Yeah, hold that thought. If you're just joining us, we are speaking with Dr. Steve Macek, free speech advocate and chair of the Department of Communication and Media Studies at North Central College in Illinois. Steve, the business about Trump being such a prolific liar, never seeming to face any consequences, is this creating a post-truth world where real facts and the truth simply don't matter anymore? If so, what does that mean for the future of our democracy?
There is that danger, and that's why we need to figure out ways of countering that misinformation, blatant dishonesty, and manipulation or casual disregard for the truth without resorting to censorship.
Yeah.
So if we were to say, it's a crime to release an AI-generated video, misleading AI-generated video that's misinformation about some political issue or another, that power that is would be created by that law could easily be abused. That's my view. So I think the best response to bad speech is not censorship, but more speech. So what should happen is, if it's AI generated and it's misleading and it's false, it should be labeled. I mean, anything AI generated, whether it's true or not, should be labeled as such, so that people understand that someone may be trying to manipulate them. I think that's the best possible solution to that particular problem. But the other solution is critical media literacy education.
Mm-hmm.
So, these falsehoods and misrepresentations are not going to have the same kind of effect if the public has the news consumers are educated about how news is produced, whose interests the news that's being disseminated by corporate media tend to serve. And if they have like a good grounding in sort of American political history, American economic and social history, that they understand that history. So I tend to believe that, education is the best response to this. I do agree that it is a looming problem.
Yeah.
I think it's a very serious problem. And I can understand the temptation of so many to say we should simply ban all of this kind of content. I can understand that temptation, but my fear is, once you create that legal apparatus, you've created a government censor, and whose interest does the government serve right now? Think about it.
Yeah, well, it's not just the government, it's social media companies. For example, social media companies typically have community standards that attempt to control hate speech and harmful disinformation. Sure. Ultimately, these standards are enforced by humans that must make subjective decisions on what should or should not be censored. How good is that approach working, and what can be done to improve it?
Well, I think, so first of all, I've read a fair amount about this, and I've written a little bit about it. I'll just say that, every social media platform of necessity moderates its content.
Yeah.
If nothing else, they moderate it in a way that where they're attempting to serve you content they think you are interested in, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're engaged with the content that they're showing you, the posts or the videos, the images they're showing you, you're going to spend more time on the platform, and then they can bombard you with more ads, which is how they make their money, right? So they all engage in some kind of moderation. They do, many of them, try to block content that they see as hate speech or that they believe will be offensive to, highly offensive to particular communities. And because these are private companies, of course, they have the right to do that.
Yeah.
But I do think that the social media companies, the platforms, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok have gotten so big that I don't think we can regard them simply as private companies anymore.
Oh yeah.
I think that that they have taken the place of the public square, right?
Mm-hmm. Certainly for young people.
Yeah, it was certainly for my students, absolutely, right? That's where they interact. That's where they meet people. That's where they find romantic partners. Mm-hmm. That's where they engage in conversation, et cetera, et cetera. So there could be a case for trying to regulate social media companies as like sort of the way we regulate utilities. Say that they have to they have to be operated. They're private, but they're private monopolies, and most of them are monopolies. They're private monopolies that have to operate in the public interest, and so they have to meet certain standards of performance. They can't release content that does harm to people. Now, I'm really not a big fan, again, going back to my sort of First Amendment absolutism of outright censorship, of suppressing certain kinds of content, but I don't have any problems with the government, say, regulating social media companies so that they aren't deliberately trying to addict, for example, young people. There's a lot of evidence that the way that these platforms is configured is designed to keep young people engaged. Mm-hmm. The infinite scroll feature that I'm sure your listeners have encountered mm-hmm. on Reels, on TikTok, etc., is part of the reason why you can go on one of these platforms for a couple of minutes just thinking I'm going to look at some amusing cat video, and then 3 hours later, you're still on.
Yeah. Well, things get pretty tricky.
Yeah. I think regulating the addictive nature of the social media makes sense.
Yeah.
I get very nervous about trying to regulate substantively the content.
I get that, but it does get a little tricky there. For example, during COVID, there was a lot of disinformation put out that basically caused lots of people to believe that there was no such thing as COVID and that they shouldn't get vaccinated and it might kill them. And I happen to know one person who died as a result of that.
Right.
And so that's an issue.
And in those cases, the people who made those posts should be held liable.
I see.
And this is that, and I think that there are people who have written about this. There's a woman named Danielle Citrone who's written about it in the context of online sexual harassment that takes place, on these platforms regularly.
Yeah.
And the problem is the platforms are configured in such a way that people can post this toxic, horrible, harassing content and be completely anonymous.
Yeah.
And I think there's a case that can be made that if someone believes they've suffered a harm because of the content, they want to bring a lawsuit against the creator of that content,
I see.
Then the social media company should rip aside the veil of anonymity in those cases. I mean, I think you'd have to really narrowly tailor it because there is a really good political reason for anonymous speech. Like, think about the current environment we're in. I'm happy that when I post an angry post about ICE, that if I do it anonymously with under a pseudonym, that they can't trace it back to me.
Well, hold that thought.
Yeah,
because things could be changing there. But right now, it's time to take a break. You are listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 89.5, 89.7, and 90.7 FM. Many voices, one station. I'm Mike Clancy, Be Bold America's co-host.
The Homeless Garden Project's Sustain Supper fundraiser takes place at their Natural Bridges Farm on June 20th. That's Saturday. The evening includes a farm-to-table meal, utilizing produce grown on the farm, cooked by a team of area chefs. The event also features local beverages, live music, and an engaging program of speakers, including chefs Estevan Silva and Andrea Molinauer. Sustain Supper takes place Saturday, June 20th at the Homeless Garden Project Farm. That's at Schaefer Road and Delaware Avenue in west side of Santa Cruz. More information available at their website, homelessgardenproject.org. And one other announcement, did you know that ponds make music? Nature is full of sounds, many of them musical, and quite possibly the forerunners of human music. Join K-Squid Sunday evening at 5 for Sustainability Now, as Ronnie Lipschitz welcomes David Rothenberg, professor of philosophy and music, to discuss his book, Secret Sounds of Ponds. Dr. Rothenberg tossed a microphone into ponds and heard an entirely new world, a realm of the unexpected and stirring rhythms and tones of some of the smallest and loudest creatures on Earth. That's Sunday from 5 to 6 right here on KSQD. And now back to Be Bold America and Mike Clancy.
In honor of Project Censored's 50th anniversary, our topic today is the global crackdown on free expression. And we are talking with Professor Steve Macek, prolific author, free speech advocate, and champion of academic freedom. Steve, you were mentioning the importance of anonymity on communication.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, and the Supreme Court has recognized in cases that actually date back to the civil rights era, the right of people to engage in anonymous expression. Right? They understand that that is beneficial for our democracy. If not everybody can, if you can speak anonymously about important public issues, because people will be more likely to speak up. And in fact, it's a fundamental part of our political history. If you go back to the Federalist Papers, right, which were and before that to like the pamphleteers of the early Republican period, or the early of the colonial period that led up, that sort of fomented the revolution. They all authored these pamphlets anonymously. They took pseudonyms, right? So it especially in times of political repression, and we're certainly living through in my lifetime, an unprecedented era, because I grew up after McCarthyism, an unprecedented era of political repression. The ability to engage in an anonymous speech.
Okay, so that's
criticize the government anonymously is vitally important.
Definitely. Now that's the good news. Here's the bad news. Congress and the White House are reportedly working on a legislative package to reshape how Americans are allowed to speak online. I think it's 3 different bills, paving the way for an unprecedented era of online censorship. The package would force social media platforms to restrict lawful speech, allow the government to dictate the design of online speech platforms, and effectively require users to reveal their identity and age. It would also expose creators, platforms, and developers to lawsuits for everyday speech like memes and parodies. What's your take on all of that?
I think it's horrifying. And we've already seen states adopt legislation like this. So there are certain states where if you want to access content that the state deems to be adult content, so maybe information about sexually transmitted diseases, or if you're an LGBTQ young person, information about sexual identity or about trans identity, you have to enter in. You have to upload a government ID, and they have to verify that you're older than 18 before you can access it. Which means that there's all these young people who need information about sexual health, about their sexual identity, who are being cut off from it by these laws. Now, a lot of these laws are facing are facing legal challenges. And I would frankly be shocked if any of those bills that are being considered by Congress actually make it into law. Because it's not simply progressives and liberals and Democrats who oppose this legislation. There are a lot of libertarian-leaning Republicans and even conservatives who have serious reservations about this, and even the ones who might support it in certain cases, they're not going to come to any kind of consent. Maybe I'm being too optimistic.
No, I appreciate hearing that. That makes me feel a little bit better. I'd like to kind of shift. Go ahead.
It's hard to form a consensus, even in the Republican Party, to get enough votes to pass this. Okay, that's good to hear. Through the House and the Senate. I think it would, but one never knows. I mean, they have other issues, right? Right now, they're worried about the mess that Donald Trump has made of the world economy, and the destabilization of all of the United States political diplomatic relationships. I mean, they've got bigger fish to fry. I don't think they're going to focus on this as their main priority. Okay. I'd like to shift gears now a little bit and talk about academic freedom, which is another one of your areas of interest. Academic freedom is declining worldwide, according to a report released in March. But the U.S. is seeing an especially rapid deterioration across one particular metric, that is institutional autonomy, or the right for universities to determine who can teach, what can be taught, and who can be admitted onto their campuses. What's your viewpoint on that? So I just, this past week, was at the American Association of University Professors, national annual meeting and summit here in Chicago. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of talk about this. The Trump administration has engaged in a truly unprecedented attack on universities, on academic freedom, and on individual academics, right? They've they've slashed funding for the National Institutes of Health and National Science Foundation on the grounds that somehow these grants were in some way woke, but really the overall effect is just to defund American science, which is a huge mistake because for years the world has come. My father was a physicist who taught at University of Nebraska and University of Tennessee for many years. For years, students, bright scientists and researchers from around the world flocked to the United States to engage in scientific research. That is now ending because more and more scientists, more and more researchers are leaving the U.S. because they can't do their research, because their grants were cut or had strings attached to them. And then, of course, you have states like Florida and Texas who are dictating to faculty what can and cannot be taught in the general education curriculum, but also what can and cannot be taught in individual courses. I'm sure your listeners are aware of the appalling case of the philosophy professor who was told he could not teach Plato's Symposium or an excerpt from Plato's Symposium in a philosophy class because it violated this appalling law that was passed by the state legislature. I mean, those places, Florida, Texas, have become kind of graveyards of the mind. And I feel really sorry. My heart goes out to academics. At this conference I was at, I met many academics who are now having to contend with this, with the restrictions that were placed on them. I mean, so it is really terrifying, and this is completely unprecedented. As Ellen Schrecker, she's one of the leading historians of McCarthyism and the Academy, put it, this is much worse than McCarthyism. Wow, that's saying a lot. Joe McCarthy and his acolytes focused on individual faculty members who they thought were like fellow travelers or communists, etc. They didn't attack whole universities. They didn't try to defund Harvard, right, or Columbia.
Yeah.
So this is totally unprecedented. And the good news is that lots of academics and other people who care about our public's access to knowledge and information are fighting back. I mean, the American Association of University Professors, AAUP, has brought a number of lawsuits challenging some of the actions attacking institutional autonomy or attacking the academic freedom of individual faculty members. Mm-hmm. And they've been successful, right?
Good.
They've won a string of victories against, for example, the administration trying to deport academics who are green card holders for engaging in First Amendment protected protests.
Wow.
And they've been successful in challenging that. So, and I learned at the conference that in the past 2 years, roughly since Trump's election to a second term, something like 16 to 17,000 new members have joined the AAUP.
Well, that's
people
good.
Are joining organizations like this because it's in their self-interest. I mean, it's a form of self-defense. And I would say like that's our best hope, right? Is solidarity. Good. The way to respond to these attacks is through solidarity. But it is getting incredibly appalling. And my biggest fear is that administrations of colleges and universities will engage in sort of preemptive compliance.
I see.
Where they're not being pressured by the administration. Nobody has sent, from the Department of Education or the Department of Justice has sent them a letter or tried to, said that they should dismantle their, their multicultural affairs office or stop offering a certain class. But preemptively, because they're afraid of coming to the attention of the administration, they do it to themselves.
Well, thanks for all that.
And that's my biggest fear.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Now, Steve, one of our traditions here at Be Bold America is to ask our guests what they think our listeners should keep doing, stop doing, and start doing. Our future depends on it. So in the context of protecting free speech and academic freedom in our country, what do you think we need to keep doing?
Well, I think people need to keep protesting. I've been, probably like a lot of your listeners, I've been, encouraged by the massive demonstrations that have been organized by Indivisible around the country, right? Flooding out into the streets. You need to use your First Amendment right to association and protest, or you'll lose it.
Yeah, so absolutely. Good advice.
We need to protest. We need to continue protesting. We need to, to recruit more people to protests. We need to be as disruptive as possible. I'm sure people have heard this saying that, once we get 3% of the population out on the street protesting, all of this will grind to a halt.
I see. That's good. Okay.
Cowed into submission. So that's what we need to do. We need to keep protesting.
What do you think we need to stop doing?
I think we need to stop. I mean, you may not agree with me, but I think we need to stop thinking that our elected Democratic officials are going to ride to the rescue.
No, I agree with that.
That we can rely on, and investing too much hope in, electing a Democrat, a particular Democrat to, a particular office. I don't think that that's going to change things at this point. I mean, yes, obviously, it would be ideal if the Republicans lost control of Congress in the midterm elections. That would be ideal. But even if they do, I would not invest a lot of hope in, say, that a Democratic-controlled Congress impeaching Trump a third time. I don't think that's a realistic hope. Yeah. And we saw what happened the last time, so the last two times.
All right, so
that's what I would say we should stop doing.
Okay, very good.
Too much hope in electoral action.
And what do you think we need to start doing?
Well, you need to start talking to your family, friends, and neighbors about these issues. Don't be afraid to express your disapproval. I mean, I imagine many of your listeners do this anyway, but don't be afraid to get involved in the fight.
Okay.
So join organizations. I mean, obviously, donate money to, public interest media, since we were talking about media before, like a lot of, independent and not-for-profit media like public and community radio stations are really hurting for money. They are our best source of information about many of the things that, many of these assaults on academic freedom and the First Amendment that we've been talking about. You should give them your support.
Excellent.
You should give your support.
Sounds like support KSQD.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Okay, so
KSQD.
Yeah.
Support independent news organizations of all kinds, in these times, Progressive Magazine, The Nation, etc. You should also donate money to organizations, to civil liberties groups that are fighting to protect our First Amendment rights.
Very good. So Steve,
money
yeah,
to PEN America, to ACLU,
okay,
to the Americans, to AAUP.
All right. Thanks so much, Steve. Steve, your efforts to defend freedom of expression and academic freedom have been superb and oh so important. Thanks so much for coming on Be Bold America. It's been a real honor to speak with you. Great.
It was a real pleasure.
Very good. As Jill would say, our future depends on it, so best of luck to you as you continue your important work.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Very good. So what's up next on Be Bold America? Please join me on July 3rd for a very special show as I interview Chad Peace from the Independent Voters Project. The Independent Voters Project seeks to re-engage nonpartisan voters and promote nonpartisan election reform. It uses a three-pronged approach. 1, inform everyday voters. 2, engage policy leaders. And 3, reform elections through initiatives, litigation, and voter education. In addition, we will have 2 local independent voters live in the studio to give us their view on nonpartisan politics and elections. So please join me, Mike Clancy, on Friday, July 3rd at 5 p.m. for the Independent Voters Project. As a reminder, Be Bold America is available as a podcast. Now you may listen to the show anytime for free by subscribing through your favorite podcast platform or by joining Be Bold America's news group. To do so, visit jillcodyauthor.com and complete the pop-up form. I want to give a special thank you to our station's program director, Howard Feldstein, who is also serving as program engineer today. You are listening to KSQD Santa Cruz and KSQT Prunedale. Many voices, one station. Listen worldwide online at ksqd.org. My name is Mike Clancy, and I want to thank you for listening to Be Bold America. Until next time, keep, stop, start.